Okay, this is a Soldano Hot Rod Plus, Hot Rod 100 Plus, and it is the owner's, quote, magic amp. And I had this about a year and a half ago. A year and a half ago, it had a bad input jack. The input jack just had strip threads. I replaced that with the proper jack, and it had a couple of solder-starved joints on the preamp tube sockets, and I reflowed those as necessary. And the amp was sounding great. It's come back to me a year and a half later, and it says intermittent signal. So we're going to find out what's going on with that. The first thing I did on this amp, like most amps, is I make sure the power and standby switches are tight. I make sure it has the proper fuses. In this case, a 5 amp fuse and a 1 amp fuse. I did a visual inspection and a sniff test. Visually, I'm a little possibly concerned by this 3-watt, 470 ohm screen grid resistor. It's got a little bit of color that I don't think it should have on the side. It measures fine cold, so I'll be verifying the screen voltage. Now, he's running this amp a little bit oddly. It's a 100-watt amp that uses 4 6L6s. He's just using 2 6L6s, and he's deliberately using the wrong output impedance to offset that. So the primary is still fine for use in 50-watt mode. He's using the inner pair, these two. In general, if you're going to do that, I recommend spacing them out more. That way the tubes, each tube runs cooler because they're not so close to each other. You can use this one and this one, or this one and this one, or this one and this one. But in general, the inner pair is the one most prone to causing heat issues. Not terrible. You know, the stock amp would have 4, so each tube would be even hotter. But it's a consideration. So it could be a problem with this screen grid resistor. It could be a problem with any of these screen grid resistors, even the ones that look okay. It could be any solder joint. But first, it's probably more likely to be a bad preamp tube or possibly dirty send and return jacks. So let me take it out of standby and see what it sounds like. Forgot my wife is upstairs teaching on Zoom, so I can't turn the master up any more than this for right now. But if the amp is intermittent, this should expose it. I really need to warm up before I do these things on YouTube. But so I'm going to jiggle wires and see if I can get things to cut out and jiggle tubes. And then we'll see what we find. Sometimes intermittent things are heat related. And it may be that I need to put a piece of metal on top of this to emulate how the amp is in operation with that box closed to generate the heat, or I might just cheat and use my heat gun. But let's tap on preamp tubes. V2. Alright, that was much easier than I feared. So let's see if it's a problem with the V2 socket or just with that valve, that tube. It's got an ugly rumble back there. So I put it in standby and reach around here. Oops, sorry about that. Reach around here and pull V2, which is a JJ. There's nothing wrong with JJs. They're no more or less prone to failure than other tubes. But that one indicates that it might not be happy with its life at the moment. So let me find one of the test preamp tubes I've got floating around here. Let's see, I've got so many, but I don't want to put a new old stock in there. I might just replace one problem with another. I've been dealing with fenders and I've got a whole bunch of stuff. All right, here's a boring old Sovtech 7025 12AX7 WB. Not a fantastic tube, but usually pretty reliable. So let's see how it does in V2. If this doesn't do it, we'll clean that socket. If that doesn't do it, we'll look at other measures we may need to take. Okay, yeah, it's not the tube, it's something with the socket. So let me pause this, and we'll flip this around and take a look at it. All right, this is the V2 socket. And it's a ceramic socket. The pins in it, I don't see them that they're malformed or anything. It could just be a bad solder joint. It's a relatively high mass socket on that PCB. Let's put this Sovtech back in. And it doesn't have a lot of tension. So I think what I want to do is power the amp off and clean that out. And there are a couple ways you can do that. This is going from a diagnosis video to a tech tip video. First of all, I want to make sure that those pins are as tight as they appear. So I take a jeweler's screwdriver or a dental pick and just kind of gently compress from each side. I want to get some contact, but I don't want to deform that. I'm going to pause this because I need to move the tripod out of the way so I can really see. And I'll report back in just a second. Okay, I've got them slightly retensioned. I'm going to put that Sovtech in now. It has more resistance. Still has a little bit of wanting to wiggle, but so do the others, and they aren't making that issue. So next thing to do is to clean it. And there are a couple ways you can do that. On this one, with the amp not powered on, I'm going to take a little bit of isopropyl alcohol. Now, if it's really a dirty socket, I'll use deoxit. But deoxit can leave a film in the socket that can be conductive. So if you use deoxit to clean a tube socket, it's best to flush it with isopropyl alcohol afterwards. So I'm just letting it drizzle down in there. And at that point, what I'm going to do is invert the chassis. So that stuff's going to want to run down out of the socket. I just get a little bit of paper towel or shop cloth or something absorbent that doesn't leave behind fibers. I don't use just any paper towels. I prefer to use shop towels, lint-free, but those have been a little bit hard to come by this year because people have been buying them when they can't get regular paper towels for their kitchen. And so when I can find them, sometimes the prices have been artificially high. But this is a relatively lint-free brand. This is alcohol off that socket. Sometimes on an older amp, these things come out the color of Keith Richards' lungs. But this isn't too bad. That's most of it. See, it's coming out dry now. Now, alcohol does evaporate, but I'm going to help that along. I'm going to flip this back over and get the old handy-dandy heat gun. Does not take much to evaporate alcohol. It looks a lot cleaner. Now, if this were an old tube as well, I would have done the tube in the isopropyl alcohol as well. Let's put that stock JJ it came in with in there. But first I examined the pins on the JJ to make sure I don't see any corrosion. No. So let's put that in there. And I'm going to power the amp back up, but because I did have some moisture introduced there, even though it's alcohol, and I'm pretty sure I got all of it, I do want to make sure of that before I have any power flowing. So I'm going to power it up on my current limiter. So if there were to be a short, I would know about it before anything blew in the amp. So let's power it on in standby. Take it out of standby. No big current. That's good. Not hearing any crackles either. So let's plug a guitar in. I'm going to leave that current protection in place for a moment. Think of it as reinforcing the fuses, just in case. So. That problem is out of V2. There's a little bit of problem at V4. Not as much. But there's a little bit of a problem there. So I think the solution, of course, since this is a Soldano and a very valuable amp and the owner's quote magic amp, is that I'm going to clean all of the tubes, preamp tube sockets, just to be sure, because the one I just cleaned is a lot cleaner looking than the others. And here's a V3. Let's see if we can do this. V3 is a little bit dirty. V4 had a little bit of that intermittent, and V5 looks pretty good, but I can get it better. So let me pause this, clean those off just the same way I showed you, and we'll see how it's doing after that. Okay, all tube sockets cleaned. No more cutting out. Of course, the amp's not done. That little bit of static as I turn down the pot just means that not all the alcohol has dried on V1. I'm not that worried about that right now. That's just how it goes. It'll dry itself out. There's no shorts or anything. Before I call this amp done, of course, I'm gonna have to do a full volume test later in the afternoon. But with all the COVID quarantine stuff, my wife, the college professor, is teaching in the room directly upstairs from me on Zoom. So I don't think even a 50-watt Soldano, even with half the output tubes pulled, would really make her very happy at this moment in time. And so we all got to work together, right?